Hello and welcome to the third episode in our series, The Evolution of a Nation, a documentary series chronicling Uganda's political, social and economic history. I'm Bat Kakoza. In the last episode, we saw the founding of UNC, the 1953-55 Kabaka crisis, the opening of the Owen Falls hydroelectricity scheme, and the founding of the Democratic Party. In this episode, we look at the crisis in UNC and the subsequent breakup of the party, Ben Chwanka's debut into Democratic Party, the elections for the representative, the first African-dominated Legico, the Wilde Committee, and the founding of Uganda People's Union, UPU, the foundation on which Uganda People's Congress, UPC, was later to be formed. Thanks for joining us. By 1956, Uganda National Congress, under the leadership of I.K. Musazi, had become a very popular anti-colonial party countrywide, as it had spread its tentacles to all the 18 districts of Uganda then.
The so-called Musazi boys fanned out into the countryside. He organized the farmers, he organized the traders, and then began what was really a nationalist movement under the Uganda National Congress, UNC. This was the main political party, the party struggling for independence, and the party that brought together most of Uganda's intellectuals who were concerned about ending colonial rule and bringing independence.
Amidst this popularity, UNC was embroiled in serious internal leadership crisis that critically weakened the party to the extent of breaking up.
Selfish interests of some of the leaders, like Jore Kiwanuka and others, who mishandled funds which were meant for the party, and they appropriated it for themselves. And this brought about a schism, even accusation of those who opposed the funds that had come here, had come from China. And people started to say that was communist money, and money from the communists, and the cause of this problem was because somebody had taken money which was meant for the party for himself, and those who opposed. So the party split between the wing led by Kiwanuka and I.K. Musazi.
In that Musazi's formation, you remember, he also got one person from Makerere, Johnny Kale, the father of Kale Kaihura, from Kisoro, and I sent him to Cairo to be his ambassador.
After his expulsion from Makerere University, John Kalekezi, popularly known as Kale, had gone to Cairo, opened and ran an office for UNC here within the African Society headquarters. While here, Kale met 93-year-old Dr. Morsi Sadel Din, the first official spokesman of the late President Abdel Nasser, and the two became very close colleagues in the anti-imperialism campaign.
The first time that the African leaders got together was in Cairo in December 1957, when we convened the first Afro-Asian Solidarity Conference. We arranged for representatives of the African liberation movement to meet in Khartoum, where we had a chartered plane. And I remember the first one who came was John Kale from Uganda, and we were very close friends, and he told me that he had to walk from Kampala to Khartoum in order to catch the chartered plane. And that was the first time that African leaders met together and started a unified campaign of liberation. As a result of that conference, many of the leaders decided to stay in Cairo, and at one time there was over 20 offices of liberation movements in the office now of the African Association in Zamalek, in that particular building there. We had different representatives. So John was representing the English dominated colonies, and there was Osendi Afana from Senegal, who represented the French. So John, any leader came from Kenya, from Nigeria, from Uganda, from Ghana. They always went to John first, and through John, they were introduced to us.
This office did propaganda work with Radio Cairo and acted as a link between the anti-colonial movement in Uganda and the democratic forces in the anti-imperialist world.
Cairo became a forum, if you like to put it, to the world to explain the issue of Africa. And if, as I said, there were over 20 liberation movement offices in Zamalek in that specific building.
This office in Cairo came to be symptomatic of the crisis in UNC. The merits of the office were disputed, and the UNC was seriously split over this disagreement. A section of the membership of UNC led by Musazi felt that Cairo office was not only a means of trading the imperialism of one country for that of another, especially a country, meaning Egypt, that had for 2,500 years controlled the whole Nile Valley, but also communism. The other section of UNC consisting of elements younger than Musazi, but with greater exposure to anti-colonialism and anti-imperialist struggles elsewhere, not only believed in maintaining contacts with the anti-imperialist world, but desired a more radical nationalist movement of the mobilizing type, striking firmly for a united Uganda.
All those factions. Then there was a difference of the elites. The educated group of the Congress rebelled against Musazi because they saw the prospects that there's a likelihood of getting independent. But this Musazi, he doesn't even have a degree. How is he going to lead us? So that group split and formed the United Congress Party with Rubogo, the former justice, as the president. And all others. So you find the leadership, the intellectual leadership was pulled out. So this one remained with these peasants.
Although the Kabaka crisis and the subsequent return of the Kabaka from exile in 1955 was generally popularized in the entire Uganda, it ironically marked the genesis of the polarization of Uganda's politics.
Buganda looked at itself as special and mobilized around the office and institution of the Kabakaship to demand for separate status. The Kabaka crisis and the politics thereafter created a dilemma for the Uganda National Congress, which now began identifying itself with the politics and interests of Mengo and made other Ugandans actually think otherwise. So the rest of Uganda now mobilized against Buganda, and Buganda mobilized against Uganda. And this politics actually created a crisis for the nationalist movement and divided the nationalist movement. It was a diversionary act, the Kabaka crisis, and it diverted Ugandans from following and pursuing democracy and pursuing national unity to pursuing local interests.
The Kabaka's government in Mengo were inimical, did not actually favor the formation of those political parties, because they foresaw another danger, that once you have these politicians, the national politicians coming in, they will submerge the Buganda government, the Buganda Rukiko.
In 1956, Benedicto Kiwanuka, a young Catholic Muganda, returned from England after completing his law degree at University College London. Before going to UK, Benedicto Kiwanuka had served in the Second World War under the King African Rifles, where he rose to the rank of Sergeant Major. In 1958, he was elected President General of the Democratic Party, DP, which at the time was in desperate need of a new dynamic leadership and revitalization.
She was vibrant and strong, young, and so on. So he was elected to be the President General of the party, which had been formed before, but had lukewarm strength. So, but this man put in more of his brains and so on, and the DP became very strong.
Formed in 1921, the Legislative Council, Legico. In effect, the parliament of that colonial period was dominated by Europeans. The first three African representatives representing Buganda, Bunyoro and Busoga joined the Legico in 1945, 24 years after its formation.
In 1944, when the British were celebrating the 50 years of their colonial rule here, it was a wake-up call to the Africans, and Africans started agitating, and the British, wanting at least to disarm the Africans or to soften the Africans, they started allowing space to the Africans in the Legislative Council.
In 1957, Governor Frederick Crawford recommended that direct elections in Buganda be held at the end of 1957 as provided for in the Buganda Agreement of 1955. He reasoned that direct elections in Buganda would provide an opportunity of testing the method of direct elections in preparation for the later general elections throughout the country in the period between 1958 and 1961. The rest of the country did not like this apparent special treatment of Buganda. They argued that any system of elections introduced for the legislative members in 1957 should be applicable to all alike and should not be confined to Buganda. Finally, the Secretary for Colonies gave an approval that direct elections for all African representatives, the Legico, from all over Uganda for the 18 seats be held throughout the country in 1958. Around this same time, Buganda took moves to keep out of Legico. The people running the show at Mengo had come to recognize that direct elections of any kind in Buganda, whether to a Uganda-wide body or the Luchiko, could undermine their preeminence in Buganda. This meant that Mengo's 5 representatives, the Legico, hung in the balance.
Buganda preferred to have the representatives to the Legislative Council nominated, and it was granted. But when the issue came up to nominate them, Buganda even boycotted. So Buganda had no representatives in the Legislative Council in 1958.
A move that automatically denied Ignatius Musazi an opportunity to enter the Legico.
Musazi in Buganda was not elected amongst the 5 to represent Buganda. So he lost opportunity to take his part in the national politics of Uganda.
So they said anybody who was pushing an idea which was not uplifting, they asked who would be the head of state. For them, they wanted the Kabaka. Who would be, and they said they didn't want Nkrumah here because they thought that Musazi, being prominent, was becoming another Nkrumah. So in the newspaper they say, we don't want the Nkrumahs here.
Musazi says, don't worry, this is not a question of people. It's of a cause. He encouraged his deputy, Nguru, to stand up and come into the house so that we continue harassing these people. When the British saw the force that was coming from Lango, all supported from grassroots, as on the very day of nomination, the British arrested Nguru and imprisoned him. So you can see the history of the rigging of our elections. Who taught us? Word went round to recall Obote from Kenya to come and stand in the place of who? Of Yosifat Nguru.
Obote had returned to Uganda in 1956 from Kenya, where he had gone to work. While in Kenya, he had got involved in the anti-colonial struggles over there with the Kenya African Union. Upon his return, Obote joined UNC and became an active member. The fact that he was one of the first people from the district to reach Makerere University, coupled with his anti-colonialism activism in Kenya, the Langis found Obote the best substitute for Nguru to represent them in the Legico. Milton Obote took his seat in 1958. Within a short time in the Legico, he had established himself as the most articulate anti-colonial spokesman.
And Obote, being very clever, he became a rabid anti-imperialist to please the Langis sentiment and to make them forget their leader who had been in jail. So he came here with fire, abusing the British offhand. And these other people who had been elected from the elite, brought up by the British, could not be out because you see, a gentleman cannot talk these things to the British, to the Wazungu. I said, you talk for us. They had made a mistake of appointing him to be the spokesman of the African elected members. Because he was fearless, he could talk their sentiment, which they themselves fear to express.
Meanwhile, the rest of the country was going ahead with the constitution of the new legico. Although Toro Kingdom and Bugisu district had issues in choosing their representatives, which were subsequently resolved, the rest of the district directly elected their representatives in October 1958 without any fuss. The 62 members of the Legislative Council took their seats in the closing weeks of 1958. Over half of them were Africans, although the Protectorate government retained a bare majority, which was achieved by appointment of Africans, both as ministers in the Protectorate government itself, and also the government's own backbench of nominated officials. Upon the opposite side of the council, known as the representative side, there were 6 Asians, 6 European members, and places for 18 Africans. Although there were Baganda who had been nominated by the governor in the council, the seats of the Buganda official representatives were vacant. The Europeans and Asian seats were filled on the governor's nomination after he had consulted with the various so-called leaders of non-African communities.
It was a milestone in the sense that for the first time, the Africans were majority and they were now taking up the affairs of the state or governing Uganda into their hands.
In December 1958, 3 senior members of UNC, Abu Mayanja, Jole Jo Chiwanuka, and Dr. Kunuka, had attended the Pan-African Congress in Accra, Ghana. They had participated in passing resolutions which, among other things, recommended that those African traditional institutions, whether political, social, or economic, which clearly had shown their reactionary characters and the sordid support for colonialism, be condemned. Returning from Accra via Cairo, where they called at the controversial office, Kiwanuka defended the Cairo office and identified the real issues at stake. Uganda cannot remain an island in a sea of Pan-Africanism and universal nationalism. Our establishment of a national office in Cairo has marked a great era in our struggle. It has broken the chains of isolation and focused world attention on the seriousness of Uganda people in our unshakable upsurge for freedom. To Musazi, that was sacrilege which could not be tolerated in the Congress. He proceeded to expel some 6 of the most significant officials of the UNC who supported the Cairo office. The response of the 6 and their political line did not take long to come out. At the annual delegates conference held on January 12, 1959, Ignatius Musazi, president of UNC, was expelled from the Congress and Milton Obote elected to replace him.
Milton Obote wasn't fighting against Ignatius Musazi. The main group actually fighting Ignatius Musazi was led by Jolly Joe Kiwanuka, by Abu Mayanja, and there were a number of other Baganda intellectuals very active in UNC. It was a division from within the UNC. One faction then asked Milton Obote to come and lead the group.
In 1959, an alliance of non-Baganda elements of the older UNC led by Milton Obote resulted into the formation of Uganda People's Union.
They realized that Buganda was actually pursuing different goals. And the members of the Legislative Council then, in 1958, formed a political party within the Legico. And that was the birth of the Uganda People's Union.
During the debates that followed in the Legico, the non-Baganda African representative members pressed for rapid progress towards full independence. In response, the governor appointed a committee under the chairmanship of Administrative Secretary J.V. Wilde to consider and to recommend to governor the form of direct elections and a common role for representative members of the Legislative Council to be introduced in 1961. Among the 15 members of the committee were 6 non-Baganda members of the Legico: Balakichiria, George Magezi, William Wilberforce Kajambula Nadiope, Apollo Milton Obote, Kusubeto Bwangol, and G. Oda. The committee toured the country extensively, held public meetings, and received memoranda. On the other hand, the Kabaka's administration not only refused to suggest names for additional appointments in the committee, but also to give evidence before it. To Buganda, it appeared the rest of Uganda was plunging swiftly towards independence.
And he did his work up to 79 when he published the report, recommending that for the first time the National Assembly would be dominated by Africans, the Ugandan Africans, and that under those arrangements there was to be appointed a prime minister to take charge. That is the internal self-government stage. That would be the stage that precedes independence. So it was more or less putting together the arrangement, constitutional arrangement, to introduce the internal self-government for Uganda.
During this time, the Ugandan National Movement, which had been formed in March 1959, became very active by declaring a trade boycott for non-African goods. The group's objectives were basically for Buganda's economically exploited group, who had long-standing grievances against the colonial government, and also fostering unity among the Baganda, who were then scattered in numerous parties, so that they could preserve their identity and protect what they viewed as their vital interests.
And it was not a political party. It was a ragtag group of people who just said that we want the economy to be transferred into the hands of the Africans.
The boycott was enforced through intimidation and physical violence against Asians and those who attempted to buy from them.
Oh, yes.
Haji Ausi Luzinda, who still operates business in Katwe, the area that was the epicenter of the boycott, was an active member of the group.
We had the stone in our books, and this laying stone. When you see you going in the Muindi's shop, we beat you with a stone. We ran away. So people started to fear. And when we understand that, he went there and buy things from Muindi's. We go back to his home. During that time, we burnt his house. Kill his goat, kill his cow. So the people start to fear to enter buy in his shop.
Because of the widespread dislike for Asian traders throughout Uganda, it quickly became a huge success in Buganda, but it was not very well supported in areas outside Buganda.
Put petrol on Indian shop during the dark time. Put fire. And even in the village, people, this is by in the run from Kasawo, from Bugere, Butambala, they ran away from they left their soup there, came here in Kampala. Feared what was doing there.
Besides, another silent element of UNM was resistance to the Wilde Committee, and as such, the group lost substantial support when it verbally attacked the Legico. Although the Mengo establishment sympathized with the group and was in favor of the boycott, it could not publicly endorse lawlessness. All the Baganda political leaders were drawn into it, with Mulira and Musazi playing the most prominent roles.
Kamya was a simple man, but the political leaders realized that if they joined this movement, they would be able to bring the masses behind them. And that caused the problem with Mengo, because Mengo realized that it was losing grip.
When the group intensified violence activities, it was banned and the colonial government arrested many of its leaders.
Of course, the colonial state was in control. It was not a failed state, and most of the people were locked up, others were exiled, and the riot or disturbance or boycott was put down.
The popularity of Uganda National Movement in Buganda had prompted the merging of Uganda People's Union, led by Red Tsiba, with the Obote-led UNC Legico members from the north of Uganda to form the Uganda People's Congress, UPC.
When a new formation founded on the ramparts of UNC, the combination of UNC and UPU of William Red Tsiba becomes UPC, a new formation, largely UNC, but now it's called UPC. Milton Obote becomes the president of this new formation.
When he comes in here and he sees his leader, Musazi, not amongst the new team that has come in Legico, then he says, well, let's do something else. Then they organize themselves and formed. They got away from UNC, and they formed what's now called Uganda People's Congress.
Well, that marks the end of the third episode in our series, The Evolution of a Nation. In the next edition, we shall look at the recommendation of the Wilde Commission, the Marlborough Constitution, the 1961 elections, which were boycotted by Buganda, the DP victory, and the first African-led government by the Democratic Party. Thanks for being part of our wider audience. My name is Bart Kakoza. See you next time.